Have you ever asked yourself, how do you execute a project in a project environment? What activities are you supposed to perform when you're executing a project in a project environment? Don't worry, in this video, I'm going to take you through step by step on all what you need in terms of project execution process group. So let's move on. Hello and welcome to my channel. My name is Oscar Mbira. I'm a certified program and project manager. This is the channel which I use to help aspiring and also practicing project managers to succeed. So in this particular video, I'm going to take you through one of the most important process group when it comes to project execution. It's called execution. This process group has got about 10 processes, but very, very important. And you realize that this is actually one of the longest and very important process group in a project environment. This is where you produce the products. This is where you make sure that the deliverables, they are also produced according to the quality, according to the expectation of either the customer or the sponsor. So project execution is very important, and it's also one of the longest that we expect to see. At least from my experience, I've seen that executing a project, which means producing deliverable by deliverable until all the deliverables are done, and ultimately one deliverable which is expected from the project is also completed. In order to understand the execution process or processes in a project environment, we're going to look at high level the activities that are actually performed during this process. So let's get through one by one. Execution is one of the processes where you have to satisfy the project requirements. So what do we mean by this, and how do we satisfy? So you have already done the initiation, you've been authorized to do it. You have already planned on how you want it to be done. Now you want to execute. How do you execute? Any project requires a project team. So this is the process where you need to, you now need to assign and assemble a project team to execute and provide the required deliverables. That is very, very important. So you need to consider that. So one of the activities is just to make sure that at least the project requirements, you satisfy them. How do you satisfy project requirements? Maybe there's one deliverable of the project, but as you run through the project lifecycle, there are specific deliverables you need to be producing towards the end project product or project deliverable. So that activity is very important during project execution process. Is also to implement all the change requests. So you might be asking, what is a change request? A change request is a requirement or a request that was not part of the original scope. It does not mean that you don't have to attend to it. You might attend, but you need to look and analyze the impact in terms of a number of variables like your time, your cost, your quality, risk, even your scope. So there are basically three categories of project change requests that you might encounter during the execution process. There is one which is called corrective action, which means there is probably something that the user has seen that makes it very difficult either to complete the project or even to use the deliverables which are coming out of the project. So they might come up with some corrective request to say, if this was supposed to be 10 meters, for example, whatever deliverable product you're working on, they want it, for example, 9 meters, so that it can fit wherever they want to put it there. So it's quite important that you also appreciate that corrective change requests, they always come in a project. Then the second category is preventive change request. What does it mean? It means as you go through the project, there's something called progressive elaboration, which means some of the details, they start coming in as you go more and more or deeper and deeper into the project. So once you go through that, once a user or even a customer or sponsor, they've gone through some of these project activities, they might come up with ways to make it better. Say, for example, you're producing an electrical product, and it has got a wattage limit. If it goes beyond that, it might even explode. So the sponsor or the customer or the user, they might come into the project and request that instead of going up to, say, for example, 250 watts, The maximum should only be 230 so that you prevent any explosion that can happen with that electrical gadget. So preventive actions, they also come in as part of change requests. Then the last one, but not least, of course, is where the defect repairs has to be done. So you could be asking, what is a defect? A defect is normally what was requested by the user, and probably it was never considered when building the deliverable. And therefore, the user will not accept it by pointing out those specific defects. So it comes in also as a change. It has got impact on costs, it has got impact on time, even on quality, even risk, even other resources. So it's quite important that you also make sure that all those kind of change requests, they are also being attended and implemented during the execution process of the project environment. Projects, it's all about people. So if you want anything to be executed, it must be executed by people. It could be internal, it could be external people, it could be trained or untrained, but at the end of the day, you have people who are supposed to execute project activities. So during execution, you're expected to assemble or even to identify and even to assign a team. So execution, from my experience, you might have a core team, what I've seen with other projects. You might have a core team that is going to run the project from the beginning all the way up to the end. But during the project lifecycle, you might start having specific teams coming in when there's a need to produce a certain deliverable or when there's a need to do a specific activity. For example, if it was an IT project or ICT project, you have a team which is coming in maybe for infrastructure purposes, your servers, your applications, your software, and so on and so forth. But as you run with the project, you might not need that specific team. So they might not be part of that other processes of the project. Or else, if it's a construction project, you might not need the roofing team maybe during the first initial stage, but you need them later. So all this is part of execution. And therefore, you need specific teams to be executing project activities all the way up to the end of the project. So one of the most important activity during the project execution process group is to assemble the project team, to assign the project team, and also even to sensitize the project team in terms of what are they supposed to do. What I normally do in my projects is I normally assign or nominate a project lead or even a project team manager. So what does it mean? The project team manager is to manage the teams. So if it's a project which you're not very much familiar and you have appointed the right project lead or project team manager, those are the people who are going to help you to assign the project team to the project. That is very, very important. You need to consult them. One of the activities which is going to keep the project manager busy is conflict management. So you're expected during the execution process stage to make sure that you are also being able to resolve conflicts. I can tell you, I was, about 5 years ago, I was involved in one of the projects which I was leading, and I had nine nationals. What do I mean by this? I had 9 people coming from different countries. And I can tell you, even from a cultural point of view, the use of some of these words, it's not going to be very easy to manage such a team. There's always going to be conflict. Whenever there are human beings, expect some conflict to happen. Whether they come from the same department, same country, same continent, whatever, there's bound to be some conflict. And conflict, it's not always that it could be something emotional. It could be a conflict in terms of ideas. It could be a conflict in terms of priority. Okay, how do you prioritize some of these activities? It could be even a conflict in terms of the technology to be used, or even the actual office setup. So conflict management is going to be part and parcel of the project execution process group. As a project manager or program manager, I can tell you, you'll be lucky if you're going to run a big project and there's no conflict. But I can tell you always find conflict. Conflict can come from anywhere, internal in the project or external of the project. It could be even from project leadership. It could be from vendors. It could be from sellers. It could be from functional managers. Conflict in terms of resources as a project manager. You want a resource to be in the project. Functional manager is saying they cannot provide more resources. They want to run their operations and so on and so forth. So conflict management is one of the activities that is expected during the project execution. When you're about to deliver a deliverable, you always have some conflicts. It could be conflict because of some personal differences. It could be conflict because of some misunderstandings. It could be conflict because of some personal behaviors and so on and so forth. So conflict management is one of the activities you should expect to be going through during the execution process group. So projects, they run from the beginning all the way up to the end. But as you run the project from the beginning all the way up to the end, it might not be very clear, especially from the beginning, in terms of which vendors are you going to use. If it's something that is major, for example, if it's an IT project, you want someone to provide the, say for example, the infrastructure, that is very clear. You can even determine from the beginning. There are also cases where the actual need of vendors comes along the way, especially when you want to do the work, when you want to when you want to complete the deliverables, you might begin to see that there's a specific vendor you need support. It could be either an extra process, extra product, whatever it is. So as part of project execution process group, you're expected also to be identifying, allocating even vendor contracts. And this is very important because as you go through the phases of the project or the stages of the project, there are certain cases where you might need a specific vendor, maybe just for support. Maybe it could be a week, 2 weeks, 2 days, or even a day. But you have no contract with them, so you need to award contracts to your vendors during the execution stage. If you were able to identify them as part of the stakeholders during the initiation process, then that's fair and fine. But as you go through the project, there are some vendors, which especially the ones who are not going to spend more time in the project, you might not need to give them contracts early in the project, but as and when the need arise. So awarding of contract to vendors is one of the activities you should be performing during the execution process group of a project. Project normally has got stakeholders. A stakeholder is anyone who may be affected or is already affected or is perceived to be affected by the project. So those ones we call them project stakeholders. Some they want to say anyone with interest in the project, but the basic definition is anyone who's going to be affected. You can be affected positively, which means you're gaining from the project, or you can be affected negatively, which means you're not benefiting from the project, or you're being disadvantaged from the project. So during the execution of the project process, you have to make sure that you are engaging the stakeholders so that they are very much aware of what is happening in the project. And if your analysis of them was very proper, they also know when to expect some communication, when to expect some reports. I can tell you from my experience, if you don't engage all the stakeholders, especially if you're working with vendors, you'll be shocked by the time you want them to do something. They'll tell you, oh, we don't have resources. Our resources, they are tied up in another project. They'll come after 6 months, 3 months, whatever the period. So it is very, very important that you always keep them aware of what is happening in the project, what are the reports, what is the progress, what you need, what support you need, or what support you can provide to them. That is very, very important to make sure that all the stakeholders in the project, those who are going to be affected by the project, they are aware of what is happening and they know what is happening in the project. So project execution involves a lot of activities. And like I said earlier, this is where you spend most of the time in a project environment. And this is where most of the important decisions, they are actually done. This is where most of the deliverables or products, they are actually produced in a project environment. So it is quite important that as you go through the project, as you execute the project, you might come across some of the risks which are materializing. What does it mean? It means it had a potential to affect the project, but now it's now an issue, which means it has already occurred and it's affecting the project. There's a process of doing, of coming up with project risk responses, which you normally do during the planning process. So during execution, this is now the time for you to execute those responses. If you want to understand more about risk responses, I've created a video on risk responses. You can also go through it on my channel, or you can follow the link in the description below. So during the execution of a project, this is the time to execute all the risk responses that you have identified earlier, that you have documented earlier. That is very, very important. The last but very important activity that you have to perform during the project execution is to capture the lessons learned. I can tell you the gold mine of lessons learned is the project team. I've seen some other project managers making a mistake, thinking that they close themselves in a particular room, they go through some documentations. Now these days people are using AI, they come up with a list of lessons learned. I can tell you, you'll be making a mistake if you do it that way. Involve all the stakeholders or the project team members. They know what was done right, they know what was not done right, they even know what can be improved, what can be dropped, or what can be actually shared with other organizational departments. So always include all the stakeholders, always include the project team members when you're coming up with the lessons learned. What I normally do in my projects is every month, I try, or 4 weeks, I try by all means to make sure that I have a short meeting with the team, either through Zoom or even Teams, a short meeting with the team, just to document the lessons learned. And I can tell you, you'll be shocked some of the lessons which you have not picked as a project manager, being articulated by one of your stakeholders or by one of your project members. So it is quite important that during the execution of the project, you also identify and document lessons learned. What can you do better? What was supposed to be done better? What can be dropped? What can be introduced? You understand? So that brings up the lessons learned as one of the most important activities that you can have in a project environment.